Hi, everyone. I'm James Turitto with the Clean Air Task Force. I'm campaign manager on the super pollutants team based in Berlin. I've been with CATF for the last 2 years or so, working on gas imaging and doing measurements around Europe, and are now increasingly with our program as we're doing work in South America and Africa as well. I'm going to start with a little background on CATF for those of you who aren't familiar with us, and then I want to do a background on a little bit about what's going on in Ecuador with its oil production sort of system, what it looks like, and what some of the major challenges are. And then I'll jump into the survey that I did last month, working with the operator in Ecuador. So that's how I'll structure it. And feel free to stop me at any time if you have any questions or want some clarification. I'm happy to address those. There we go. So the Clean Air Task Force is international environmental policy organization based in Boston, but we have 100 plus global staff around the world, from Mexico City here in Berlin to San Francisco and all over. We have two primary offices, Boston and Netherlands, and then about 15 other staff here in Europe, I think a couple in South America, and we also have consultants working for us in Africa, mostly in West Africa. We've been working on methane since the early 2000s, primarily from the policy side in the US. We've expanded sort of going about 8 years ago. We started doing more international work, starting in North America, Mexico and Canada, and then we started shortly after that. We started working in South America, and for the last about 5 years, Nigeria as well. We're expanding more in Africa, Ghana, Cameroon, Gabon, a few other places too. I'll show a map shortly of where we're working and where we're planning to work. Our expertise and sort of how we operate is along 4 different channels. So we focus on policy development and advocacy, working directly with government agencies and ministries. We also work on some research and technology development, obviously not so much on the science side and publishing academic research papers, doing a lot of policy specific papers and technical papers that can really inform a lot of the policy discussions that are occurring, and then keep a close coordination with a lot of the researchers too. We do a lot of media work as well. That's kind of, part of our work is strong advocacy to really keep methane in the spotlight, to really highlight it and make sure that, there's pressure on policymakers and governments to bring together regulations to act. And then we do a lot of high-level diplomacy as well, working with various governments at a senior level for, kind of negotiations, larger agreements, and that kind of work. So that's kind of the 4 tracks or channels that we work on, or how we work. And this is where we're working. So green is where we're actually working. Blue are our priority engagements of where we'd like to expand to. China is actually going to be switching over to a green very shortly. We just haven't updated the map. And there's a few other countries potentially in Africa that might be switching over as well. But that's a little bit longer in the pipeline. So, we are working globally. We're trying to focus in large oil and gas producing countries, obviously, but also where we can make a lot of progress. The focus in Europe is largely through the current policy discussions on the methane regulations and how Europe is a central player to policy globally and sort of a leader on the climate front. So we're really focused, even though Europe has a small amount of oil and gas production, small amount of total methane emissions, it has a large footprint from what it imports. And so that's why we're really focused as well in Europe. So getting into our work in Ecuador, start with a little background, then I'll talk about our work. There's Ecuador's oil production has sort of flatlined around 500,000 barrels per day for the last 8 years or so. The government has plans to try to almost double it up to about 800,000 per day over the next 5 years. Oil operations are primarily based in the Amazon basin. So, there's a map of the different plays there that you can see in the different blocks. It's very much conventional oil production, multi-well pads, some flaring on site, a lot of the oil and gas being piped to central processing facilities out, within a 5 to 10 kilometer space from range from the pads. Then separation, storage, and flaring occurs at a lot of the central processing facilities. Then it goes towards some refining and then on to export. And they export a lot of crude because they don't have the refining capability. But a key thing to note here is that there isn't a lot of separation that happens on site. So there's not a lot of gas pipelines in the country. There's minimal associated gas development in Ecuador. So the country uses, produces about 12 billion cubic meters annually, but then it flares about 1.25 billion cubic meters as well. So, quite a bit of flaring. They've been trying to create some, initiating some capture and utilization programs, primarily for local power generation, switching over diesel power generators to gas power generators. And it's kind of a big project, so getting into the flaring details a little bit more. So you can see how the flaring intensity, the chart below is from the World Bank. The flaring intensity has actually climbed over the last few years. A lot of that is because production has actually gone down a little bit. So flaring has gone up, and so the intensity has gone up while production has kind of slowed or gone down a little bit. So intensity is increasing, and they're really trying to figure this out because a lot of these flares exist near to populations. And so, we did some analysis. About almost 90% of the flares are within 5 kilometers of populated areas. Just last year, there was a court case in Ecuador, in a local court case that has required the company to start to put out those flares within 18 months that are close to populations. There's not exactly specifics on how close to the population the flares they need to put out are. We were doing that's why we're trying to help with some analysis on this. But yeah, so they're gonna have to put it out, or at least try as best they can within 18 months, which is a very quick timeline, given that there's really no pipelines for gas, for transporting gas to, say, Quito. There is a lot of diesel generation, and so they're kind of working on this project now. But when you think about all of the flaring that's occurring too, and you think about the flaring kind of in South America generally, I mean, I don't have a map of all the flaring in South America. I mean, we don't see any detectable ultra emitters in the Amazon basin. They're potentially, it's hard to say. There are no ultra emitters that are occurring, or the detection is, detections are problematic for, I think, that region, and I'm sure others on this call could explain it a lot better than I can in terms of the limitations of satellite visibility in that area. But being in the field and also working with Carbon Mapper, who was out there on this trip with us, they on the policy side of stuff, like thinking about when you can actually do remote sensing and actually look at overflights in the region. I mean, when I was there, it's cloudy the whole time. It's blanketed with clouds, and it was raining half the time. So actually doing the field work itself was a bit of a task, and we had to just kind of work through the rain in some cases, or just kind of get out and deal with the weather. So our work in Ecuador specifically has been going on for over a year. We've been doing a lot of meetings virtually with ministries, regulators, operators, and then we've held a few online workshops, but this was our first in-person workshop. The goal of our work in these workshops has been to help them develop better emissions inventories and estimates. And this last workshop was really to help them start thinking about designing a regulatory framework. And we hope that over the next 6 months to 6 to 12 months, we'll be able to help design that with them and kind of help them along, where we've done in other countries as well. So this project too was helping just to start thinking about emissions mapping in the field. So we were partnering with both the ministries as well as the operator to do a survey. It was only a few days, 4 days in the field. And the goal is then to have this potentially followed up in the next 6 months or sometime this winter, assuming we can get all the permissions to do overflights that Carbon Mapper would do, then to be able to really map out, and not just in Ecuador, but potentially other countries that we're trying to continue our engagements with in South America. The short-term goal, I've mentioned this a few times, developing new regulations and hopefully having something on the books, developing greater monitoring capacity for the operator. It was important to kind of note that when I went out with the operator, they haven't really ever done this. We're using just a simple camera, but that hadn't been in Ecuador before. So really first time just having their staff get out with a camera and using it was eye-opening for them as well. So this is just an overview of what we did over a 4-day period. Visited 10 different facilities, a couple different well pads, central processing stations, compressor station, gas plant. It's across 3 different blocks. These are the highest, some of the highest production blocks in Ecuador, both on well count as well as actual production. And at each site, we spent somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes for well pads and compressor station and gas plants, and then about an hour to an hour and a half at the central processing stations. And in the central processing stations, as I was kind of mentioning, that's where a lot of separation of gases, that's where a lot of the flaring is, and a lot of the large oil storage tanks occurred. So real quick, I mean, we're using standard FLIR camera, spectral range with 3.2 to 3.4 micrometers. It can't quantify the emissions, so we didn't do any quantification or make any attempt at it. I mean, you could use it with the OGI function, but we haven't been using that yet. So, and then it can't speciate the gas. So we didn't do any additional measurements to actually try to speciate the gas coming out of the storage tanks, but yeah. So the general findings from the trip, and I'll go into kind of also more details, and then show some more specifics of what it's looking like actually on the ground. So handling of condensate liquids is usually done in open pits at a number of sites that I visited, and so that led to large sources of emissions. Tank venting was common. This was largely due to open hatches. Some of the tanks had holes on the roofs. At least that was what was communicated to me from site managers, but it was unclear from my vantage point to actually see that. So open hatches obviously are clearly identifiable, and that seemed like it was really just a case of of the third-party contractor that they used, not closing the hatches after taking their measurements every morning. So, there's some simple fixes here. So a lot of fugitive emissions were occurring from improperly installed and broken equipment, which you just don't know about until you walk around with a camera. And so it was clear once you start seeing this stuff and looking at it that there's open lines and other malfunctioning equipment. And then there were leaks present in the valves associated with gas separation, transmission, processing, and compression. But like I said, there's not a lot of gas production in the country. There's transmission, compression. I saw maybe I went to 2 different compressor units, but they're very small, and there's just not a lot of use. I mean, as Ecuador and the company try to and begin to utilize the gas more, then there's certainly going to be a lot more gas transmission, gas processing, and need certainly to keep an eye on that, because what I did see, was problematic certainly, but could be resolved with doing some observational work. So just in kind of overview of what I looked at the different sites, W's wells, P is central processing site, central processing facility, CS is compressor station, and GP is gas plant. So it was common. Most of the storage tanks that I looked at, with the exception of a few, were emitting a sizable amount of gas from the roofs. The separators, I saw some emissions from separators, but it wasn't a significant amount that I've seen. So compared to what I've seen, and there's few open-ended. There's one major large open-ended line, valves, flanges, compressor itself. With emergency relief valves, flares, that's kind of a numbers game. I only visited 10 sites. I saw one partial, unlit flare, but it seemed to be that was emitting, but it was kind of a small amount. The flares, I showed earlier the number of flares in Ecuador. The count from VIIRS is about 87, but there are actually flare clusters. So a lot of the sites, you have 3 or 4 flares next to each other, which are burning quite hot, and they're quite large. And so if one of them does happen to go out, I was told that they often just will relight because of the flare next to it. Will just relight it. So and also a lot of these sites are manned, so there is usually someone on most of the sites, although there's probably some well pads that aren't fully manned all the time. I'm not saying that there aren't, it isn't a major problem, but I'm just saying it's kind of inconclusive to really tell from the work that I was doing. Other goes into a number of different categories, but some things are just kind of broken on site, and others, some things, there was kind of open degasification pits of wells of crude. So, those are a few of the things that I kind of observed. So this is the condensate storage and handling. This is something that we're talking with the company about. It's clear this is just a process emission, so it's not something that can be fixed right away, but processes would need to change and evolve. But on the other hand, there are other things that we're hoping that we can start to change very quickly in terms of practices, which is the practice of just leaving the tank hatches left open, which is a lot, as you can see, a lot of gas coming out. And when I was there working, I was walking around with site managers. We would see something, we'd see the hatches open, and then show them, let them watch through the camera as I'm recording while they have an engineer go over and close the hatches, and they can see that it's clear. Some simple things like that will reduce the emissions coming from the tanks. And then other, other malfunctioning equipment associated with the tanks. So seeing fire extinguishing safety units that seem to be malfunctioning, and then the tank metering lines, which appeared to be improperly installed. There wasn't a cap that was installed in the piping to keep the gas from coming out. Again, these are easy things that can be fixed when we as we're working with the company and they start to do this kind of work, hopefully in the future. And then, yeah, I mentioned separator valves and connector failures. This wasn't too common, and the one on the left was intermittent. The one on the right was a continuous stream. Fairly small amount of emissions itself, and especially from the number of separators I was looking at, but stuff that can be easily fixed. And then another kind of practice that seemed to be common, which I observed, was just venting of the casing gas. Which I was, they wanted to do to increase the flow of the oil. So a lot of the gas, sometimes from the casing well, would just go straight to the flare on the site too. But they were just opening the valves and letting the gas come out. And happened to rain really hard that morning, which made it even more interesting, because I walk up and you can't see this until you put the camera on, but you're looking at the at the site, and you're just seeing kind of a hot tub appear in front of you, bubbling at the well. So an interesting visit nonetheless. So that's all I had to present of my trip. I hope this was kind of interesting. We're, like I said, we're planning to work closely with the government. We're working closely with the operators, the regulators, hoping to develop regulations in Ecuador, hoping to really also further map out the extent of emissions, mappers access opportunity to get down there. And so hopefully we'll have more in the next 6 months to a year as this work evolves.